Welcome to the Build.com API Integration Guide Retry tutorial. This comprehensive guide will walk you through the step-by-step process of retrying a failed Build.com API integration. First, understand the basics of Build.com API and its integration process. The Build.com API is a powerful tool that allows you to access and manage your billing information programmatically. However, like any other API, it may encounter errors or failures during integration. To retry a failed Build.com API integration, start by identifying the cause of the failure. This can be done by checking the API response for error codes or messages. Common error codes include authentication errors, invalid request errors, or rate limit errors. Once you have identified the cause of the failure, you can begin the retry process. The first step is to check the Build.com API documentation for the recommended retry policy. The documentation will provide guidance on the number of retries allowed, the retry interval, and any specific requirements for retrying a failed request. Next, implement the retry policy in your code. This can be done using a retry library or by manually implementing a retry loop. The retry loop should check the API response for errors, wait for the recommended interval, and then retry the request. It is also important to implement exponential backoff in your retry policy. Exponential backoff involves increasing the retry interval after each failed retry. This helps prevent overwhelming the API with repeated requests and reduces the risk of rate limit errors. In addition to implementing a retry policy, it is also important to handle errors and exceptions properly. This can be done by catching and logging exceptions and providing user-friendly error messages. To illustrate this process, consider the following example. Suppose you are using the Build.com API to sync invoices and the request fails due to a rate limit error. To retry the request, you would first check the API documentation for the recommended retry policy. Then, you would implement a retry loop in your code that waits for the recommended interval and retries the request. Finally, best practices for retrying a failed Build.com API integration include monitoring API requests and responses, logging errors and exceptions, and testing retry policies thoroughly. By following these best practices and implementing a retry policy, you can ensure reliable and efficient integration with the Build.com API. In conclusion, retrying a failed Build.com API integration requires a thorough understanding of the API and its integration process. By identifying the cause of the failure, implementing a retry policy, and handling errors and exceptions properly, you can ensure successful integration and minimize errors.